As you wearily step barefooted out of your living quarters, you're immediately bathed in the comforting warmth of the sun. The light has been so elegantly reflected by an orbiting mirror, dimmed to the perfect intensity that you feel completely at home. The sky, once shrouded in thick clouds, now reveals a kaleidoscope of colours as the refracted sunlight filters through the modified atmosphere. Giant floating solar panels harness the abundant sunlight, casting a gentle glow on the landscape below. You inhale, filling your lungs with clean, fresh, oxygen-rich air. Notes of sweet yet alien pollen fills your nostrils, enriching your senses like a blanket of relaxing calmness. The native Venusian plants, genetically engineered for this environment, paint the ground with vibrant hues. You pause for a moment to listen. The chirping of alien insects intermingles with the gentle rustling of engineered vegetation, creating a melody unique to this newfound biosphere. As you run your fingers over the leaves of alien fauna, you can sense the resilience and adaptability imbued in them, a testament to humanity's scientific prowess. The air is filled with the harmonious symphony of nature and technology. Whirring sounds from hovering robotic assistants echo in the background, their AI-driven algorithms maintaining a delicate ecological balance. They monitor environmental parameters, repair infrastructure, and collaborate with human inhabitants in the ongoing evolution of Venus. Standing on the surface of Venus, a once hostile world, now pulsating with life. Thoughts of the ingenuity, innovation and sacrifice that has happened to make this possible crosses your mind. The harmonious coexistence of biology and technology has painted a picture of a future where the spirit of exploration and adaptation thrives and drives us forward to a galactic future. From the very origins of life, biology has done a few things more consistently than reaching out to new frontiers and exploring new spaces. Systematically adapting to new environmental niches, evolving to perfectly master them, only to subsequently find new limitations or barriers to further expansion. And for the past 3.7 billion years or so, life has replicated and evolved its way into every nook and cranny, every conceivable environment across the entire surface of the Earth. Now, with nowhere else to go, biological life forms have taken on increased complexity, each new generation evolving through competition with other species for the limited resources that exist. Earth is finite. Life can only spread so far. And on one hand, this could be seen as a signal that we need to be careful not to overexploit these bountiful resources on Earth, upsetting the intricate balance of nature beyond irreversible tipping points. Don't worry, I'm not going to get political. On the other hand, maybe it's time for us to look beyond the restricted sphere of our small blue planet outwards towards the boundless infinity of the universe. An inconceivable thought for 99.9% of the complete history of Earth. But now we're here, humans, with our oversized brains and ability to specialise and cooperate, as well as having immense technological prowess. Well, some of us anyway. It's a team effort. Maybe our species are the ones that can breach the impasse. Maybe we should be the first Earth life to become an intergalactic species. I mean, we're the only species on Earth that could conceivably do this, and we simply don't know how common the emergence of intelligent technological life is. I mean, it took 3.7 billion years of evolution, 4.6 billion years of Earth even existing, just to make it to this point. One potentially spacefaring species. Just one in 3.7 billion years. And we've arrived with only a fraction of Earth's habitable time remaining. You see, unfortunately, the increased luminosity of the Sun over the next 600 million years is set to completely disrupt the carbon-silicate cycle through weathering of rocks, reducing atmospheric carbon to levels where plants won't even be able to photosynthesize. And I don't need to tell you, no plants, no animals. No animals, no intelligent, technologically advanced species. The clock's ticking, and following an untimely demise of humanity, I'm not sure there's even enough time for a second multiplanetary species to evolve on Earth. So, if we aren't going to ascend into the heavens to colonise the universe, then who is? So, as you might have guessed, I'm a bit of a speciesist. I back humanity, in spite of its numerous flaws, and I'm an advocate for further propagation of our species into the beyond. Accommodation not big enough to house the current inhabitants? Get a bigger house. And what could be bigger than the entire universe? Obviously, we'd have to start small, baby steps and all that. But there's all the space we could possibly want out there. They do call it space after all. So, there's a few options. We could traverse the galaxy in spacecraft designed to be self-sustaining for eons, or even create huge megastructures that could house colonies in fixed orbits around the Sun or other suitable stars. But a popular first step is to establish colonies on existing celestial bodies, close to home, in relative terms. Bodies such as the Moon or Mars are pretty popular. Beyond simply building colonies on the surface of a planet with the purpose to build habitats to simulate conditions here on Earth, there is an extension to the process called terraforming. This is where, through intensive and deliberate geoengineering efforts, the planet or moon in question is made more Earth-like, culminating in a finished globe where biology of an earthly origin will be able to live unaided by technology. Although this might seem like science fiction, there are some pretty serious proponents of the idea. An obvious one that springs to mind is, of course, SpaceX and the infamous Elon Musk, that are putting their money where their mouth is by making the aforementioned baby steps towards Mars. And even NASA has set their sights on the moon by intending to create a moon base with the Artemis project. So we're going to get there. But are the moon and Mars the best option for global colonisation as a terraforming project? Or might there be a better option in our galactic neighbourhood? Somewhere that at first glance seems to be an unlikely candidate, but upon further inspection, could be ideal. Now I have to admit, for a quick visit, both the Moon and Mars are pretty good. A solid surface to land on, and walk around, or should I say, bounce around due to the microgravity. All you need is a pressurised suit that's well insulated, and you're away, for the short term at least. Unfortunately, this would not really be possible during a visit to Venus, with surface temperatures of 460 degrees Celsius, that's 860 degrees Fahrenheit for the Americans in the room, which is hot enough to melt lead. Add to that the atmospheric pressure of around 93 times that on Earth. That's the equivalent of being 1 kilometre, 0.6 miles beneath the sea. Yeah, you ain't standing on the surface. However, up in the clouds of Venus, between 30 and 100 miles or so, temperatures and pressures are surprisingly Earth-like. And with such a dense atmosphere below, buoyant Venetian airships could be a way to visit the hellscape. Anyway, terraforming. Right, let's start with the moon. It's nice and close with a similar amount of solar radiation to Earth. That's good. It has a similar composition to Earth, with potentially abundant water. Also good. Unfortunately, it's only 1/6 the mass of Earth, and consequently wouldn't be able to hold onto an atmosphere for long, if at all. It also has a geologically dead core, which means no magnetosphere, so high radiation levels. Not good. Check out my last video about the pitfalls of being an astronaut, where these issues are covered in a little more detail. So, turning the moon into a mini Earth might be a stretch too far. But what about Mars? Well, it's about twice the mass of the moon, at around 1/3 of that of Earth. That's positive, but not ideal. Microgravity isn't great for our physiology, but nevertheless it's got abundant water in the form of ice. It also has a thin CO2-rich atmosphere. Unfortunately, it's only 0.6% as thick as the one here on Earth. The thing is, even if we vaporise the ice caps and released mineralised CO2 deposits by strip mining and processing the regolith that covers the entire Martian surface, the atmospheric pressure would only be increased to around 7%. Delivery of additional resources through bombarding the planet with captured asteroids could be an option, adding water and CO2 over vast periods of time, bulking up the atmosphere. But then, there's the issue of the distance from our star. Incident sunlight is just above 40% of that which we experience on Earth. So, no matter what we do, it's likely to be a bit of a chilly world, by earthly standards. Then of course, there's Venus. As we've established, it's wicked hot with an atmosphere that could implode a tin can with ease. But on the plus side, it's roughly the same size as Earth, with a similar composition, and is much nearer to the Sun. Better to have too much energy than not enough, in my opinion. So, could we live there? Could we change it? Now, creating a global colony on our tumultuous twin planet, Venus, might seem like a preposterous concept. I mean, is it even possible? And if it is, how long would it take humanity to completely terraform a planet like Venus? 1,000 years? 10,000 years? Well, according to a detailed plan written by the late engineer and scientist Paul Birch, not only is it plausible, but Venus could actually be the best option of all our celestial neighbours. Oh, and as for timeline, how does 250 years sound? So, I came across an interesting and speculative paper whilst perusing the interweb that essentially outlines a comprehensive plan for terraforming Venus. The paper is aptly titled Terraforming Venus Quickly and is published in the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society back in 1991. Link in the description should you want to read all the way through. And even though 1991 is over 30 years ago, 30 years, God I'm old. Anyway, Like I said, even though the paper is 30 years old, the science behind it holds up well, even if the estimated costs might have increased a bit due to inflation. The detailed paper is 11 pages long and a tad dense in parts, but don't worry, I'll break it all down into everyday language and save you 3 hours picking through the details. So, first things first, obstacles to overcome, or things to be corrected in order for Venus to be habitable. Obviously, it's hot, very hot. Partially because it's closer to the Sun than Earth at 0.72 AU, and partially due to a runaway greenhouse effect, with a thick Venusian atmosphere trapping heat, which leads on to the second issue, that thick Venusian atmosphere. It imposes a pressure of 95 bar at the surface. Thirdly, Venus rotates very slowly in the opposite direction to Earth. In fact, a Venusian day is longer than a Venusian year, 243 and 225 Earth days respectively. So 127 days in the sun and same again in the dark. Not sure I could get my circadian rhythm to shift to that schedule. Then you've got to consider the sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide and sulfuric acid clouds, minor issues. Oh, and no free oxygen or water? Not looking too optimistic, but there is a plan. So, to terraform Venus, we have to 1. Cool the planet to 290 Kelvin, roughly equal to that on Earth. 2. Reduce atmospheric pressure to around 1 bar by removing all of the excess CO2 and other poisonous atmospheric constituents. 3. Reduce the length of the day to around 24 hours. And 4. Increase the amount of water to raise the water table and sustain seas. Piece of cake. First things first, we've got to cool this thing down. And if you want to cool down an oven, what's the first thing you do? Turn it off. And the oven, in the case of Venus, is of course the sun. Obviously, you can't turn the sun off, but you can reflect or divert sunlight so that it doesn't hit the planet using an enormous mirror. And when I say enormous, we're talking somewhere in the region of 2.5 times 10 to the 14 meters squared, which is 250 million kilometers squared. That's more than 23 billion football fields or 27 USAs for reference. Now don't worry, the mirror doesn't need to be a perfectly polished surface. Initially, it just needs to block incident light from hitting Venus, allowing it to cool. Solar cell material made of a aluminized film would do the trick. Obviously, this is still quite an undertaking, as even though this is an ultralight material, the mirror would have a mass of around 7,600,000 metric tons. For obvious reasons, this will be best manufactured in space using lunar or asteroidal material, as launching that amount of matter from Earth would be extremely expensive. This colossal cooling mirror spanning 1.27 times the diameter of the planet could be placed near to the Lagrangian point, L1 of the Venus-Sun system. This is where gravity between the two bodies equalise. There would need to be some adjustment to account for photon thrust generated by the solar wind. I mean, it's solar cell material. But if the cooling mirror is positioned slightly closer to the sun, its gravity would be exploited to balance out the force of the sunlight. As you can see from the diagram, the proposed mirror is made up of an inner cone and external annular slats that work together to divert light away from Venus. A second annular support mirror, which would be a large ring structure around 1/6 of the area of the cooling mirror, positioned in orbit around Venus, would act as a stabiliser, directing light back into the inner cone of the cooling mirror, holding it in place. Staying on the subject of mirrors, but jumping forward a touch, the author hypothesised the use of a third mirror called a soletta. This would be a smaller mirror, though still pretty colossal, that orbits Venus every 24 hours. This could be designed to direct some of the diverted sunlight back to the surface of Venus, simulating a 24-hour day and night cycle, without the need to speed up the rotation of the planet. Pretty smart, eh? This simulated sun would appear at right angles to the sun's true position, and would appear 40% larger, but with the magnitude of brightness that we see on Earth. Mirrors, mirrors everywhere. But how long will it take to cool? Well, based on the calculations in the paper, not that long. The trouble is, when you've got an atmosphere as dense as the Venusian one, the gases that make it up hit critical temperatures that periodically induce phase changes, causing certain atmospheric constituents to rain down as liquid or fall as snow. This means that the temperature and pressure reduction occurs in a stepwise fashion. The cooling of Venus would take place in stages. The first stage would take somewhere between 5.6 and 58 years to cool Venus from a 730 Kelvin inferno all the way down to a balmy 304 Kelvin. The reason for the large deviation in estimated time is that the impact of the planet's greenhouse effect is pretty uncertain. Anyway, 304 Kelvin is actually an Earth-like temperature, but with a 95 bar atmosphere, I wouldn't be moving in just yet. At this stage, CO2 in the atmosphere would start raining down onto the planet, gradually reducing the pressure, forming CO2 seas. This stage would take between 7.4 and 22 years to complete, dropping the pressure down to 74 bars. This happens to be another critical point where the temperature can fall even further. The following stage would take around 48 years, seeing the temperature fall to 217 Kelvin, which incidentally is colder than Earth's polar regions. This further cooling is necessary in order to further reduce the pressure. Carbon dioxide would rain down until the pressure is around 7 bars. At this point the seas would begin to freeze, and once the pressure gets as low as 5 bars, CO2 would begin to precipitate as snow. The freezing process would take a further 17 years, following which it takes a further 9 years to reduce the temperature to 192 Kelvin and the pressure to 2.8 bars, and in the final stage the temperature is reduced even further to a frigid 142 Kelvin, finally achieving a more earthly atmospheric pressure of 3 millibars over another 4 or more years. So, in case you didn't manage to keep track, the author estimates that simply by installing cooling mirrors it would take somewhere between 90 and 200 years to turn Venus from a scorching hot pressure cooker into a snowball globe. I think that's pretty quick. For example, Birch hypothesised the construction of immense cooling towers or heat pipes to accelerate the cooling process. Pipes that stretch all the way up to the upper atmosphere could be filled with evaporatable liquid, water at temperatures above 400 Kelvin and ammonia at temperatures below that. These compounds would vaporise due to the high pressures at the bottom of the pipe, carrying heat upwards, then cool and condense at the top of the pipe, falling back down to repeat the process. This creates a cyclical convection current, carrying heat up through the atmosphere, circumnavigating the insulating greenhouse effect of the Venusian atmosphere and accelerating cooling, perhaps shaving a fair few years off the projected timescale. Other methods have also been suggested that could speed up the process. For instance, instead of building huge heat pipes, this cooling effect could be replicated through the creation of a vortex engine that would kind of be like a stationary tornado, generating atmospheric updraft and releasing planetary heat, and even generating energy for any cloud-top colonists that decide to brave the Venusian elements. Another idea put forward would be to create atmospheric windows that allow radiation at specific wavelengths to escape into space, again aiding cooling. So, cooling the planet down looks to be within our wheelhouse, but we still have the issue of having very little water, no oxygen, and now gazillions of tons of frozen CO2 to contend with. It's hard to quantify how much water already exists on Venus, but the consensus is leaning firmly towards not enough. There could be an outgassing of water from the crust induced by hydrostatic loading as the CO2 drained into the seas, but the amount is impossible to quantify. Estimates of the depth of water required across the planet vary from 1 centimetre to 1 metre, settling around 10 centimetres conservatively, which in any case is a lot of water. Some water can be obtained through chemical reactions with sulfuric acid in the atmosphere, but this would only produce around 1 millimetre of water for Venus. In order to get enough H2O to terraform the planet, the author needed to get inventive. Oh, and inventive he got. Paul Birch has come up with an ingenious way of harvesting resources from our planetary neighbours, a technology called an orbital ring. I'll pop a link to the associated paper in the description, which goes into much more detail about how these things work. But essentially, the idea is that you have a giant orbiting conveyor belt that uses counterweights to dip in and out of the atmosphere. If one of these orbital rings were built around Neptune, hydrogen could be harvested from the atmosphere to be delivered to Venus and then reacted with CO2 to produce water. Now, whilst this method is apparently quite cost effective, it would take a long time to gather and transmit enough hydrogen for the planet's requirements, which is why Mr. Bird proposes another solution, aptly called gravity-assisted rapture of an ice moon. And it truly would be rapturous, plucking a moon from the heavens of one planet and depositing it to the heavens of another. Seriously, planet not got enough water? Don't worry, just grab yourself one of them icy moons over yonder and crash it into said planet. Problem solved. So, the paper describes ejecting one of Saturn's icy moons, Enceladus or Hyperion, for example, by using gravity assist from neighbouring moons, launching it towards Jupiter, swinging its trajectory towards the inner solar system, and ultimately to Venus. The journey would apparently only take 15 to 20 years, with the opportunity to do this only occurring every 20 years or so. Timing is everything. There are water volume estimates for each moon, with Enceladus carrying a colossal 140 metres of water if deposited on Venus, and Hyperion a mere 34 metres. For this reason, Enceladus is favoured for the water needs of Venus. But to be honest, Hyperion might be an ideal candidate to hydrate Mars, filling 2 planets with 1 stone. Or 2 moons, so to speak. If manipulating the position of celestial bodies using gravity alone is too long a process for you, have no fear. There is another ingenious way to accelerate the process, namely creating a steam rocket powered by a solar furnace. This is where, using yet another sophisticated arrangement of mirrors, the sun's rays could be highly concentrated to a specific point on the moon that you want to move. This heats up water stored in the core of the moon, which is directed and ejected, accelerating the moon, basically turning it into a steam rocket. This technique would not only allow for reduced transit time, but would also make adjustments to the trajectory possible en route. Obviously, gains to speed have to be balanced with water mass lost. I mean, the whole point is to add water to Venus, not to lose it all to space. Okay, so we can get the moon there, but how do we get the water onto the surface? Well, the simplest and most direct way is to just crash the moon into the planet. A little haphazard, but if done early on when the atmosphere is thick, it could work. Yes, it would initially heat the atmosphere to 10,000 Kelvin and ionize it, but after about a year, the temperature would cool to roughly 600 Kelvin and the rain would wash out the atmosphere. The only problem with adding water this early in the process is that when the CO2 seas freeze over the top of the water, you would need to drill down through the CO2 to access it. This extra graft could be mitigated first by waiting for the planet to cool, but crashing the moon into a much thinner atmosphere means we would need to slow its approach to around 12 meters per second to get a similar 10,000 Kelvin temperature on impact. A better approach could be to split the moon into smaller parts. These parts, or moonlets, would simply orbit the sun somewhere on Venus's orbital path. These moonlets could then be deposited to the surface every 112 days, half a Venus year, causing a much smaller impact on the planet. Well, smaller when compared with that of dropping an entire lunar globe on the surface all at once. The moonlet approach would be much more favourable should there be any colonists or outposts on Venus at the time. It is estimated that if 1% of the moon Enceladus is deposited at a time, condensation would commence at around 320 Kelvin, depositing 1 metre of rain over approximately 70 days. The climate would be hot and humid, but not unbearable for colonists. So, at this point, the planet has cooled, the atmosphere thinned, and the water delivered. But before the planet's temperature can be allowed to return to an earthly warmth, something has to be done about that CO2 that's locked in ice in the global oceans. Should the carbon dioxide thaw, it would be back to square one, a rapidly thickening atmosphere with a strong greenhouse effect. Simple but costly solution to prevent thawing would be to thermally insulate the frozen CO2 oceans using foam and rock composite blocks. Now, these blocks would need to cover 70% of the planet's surface for this to work, with water oceans over the top, so no small feat. Now, warmth from Venus's crust would inevitably evaporate some of the frozen CO2, but hopefully this excess could be collected and exported, possibly to Mars to thicken up the atmosphere there. Now, the rest of it could be used in the next very important process, producing oxygen. On Earth, oxygen is produced through photosynthesis. This is where photosynthetic organisms utilise carbon dioxide and water and convert them into sugars and oxygen. This could actually start very early in the process, by seeding the clouds of Venus with photosynthetic algae, even before cooling has begun. Of course, this is providing that the essential nutrients such as magnesium and phosphorus are present in adequate amounts. Following the cooling of the planet, other vegetation could be added to increase the oxygen levels, with the added benefit of being able to remove the toxic level of carbon monoxide that is present in the atmosphere. You see, plants like trees and grass can utilise carbon monoxide as readily as carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So levels of this deadly gas will be reduced to safe proportions in short order. As the moonlets are deposited, the oxygen level and water levels would increase with each icefall, making Venus more and more Earth-like as the years pass. Eventually, colonies sustained in pressurised tanks would be able to roll up their coverings and breathe in the fresh air on a fully terraformed Venus. So, that's a bit of a run through of the process. But what about the cost? And of course, the benefits. Now, the author has completed a breakdown of his estimated costs over the 200-year or so period that the prospective project would take place. He also estimates that some economic benefit, and even speculates what the potential holding capacity of the planet would be at various points. So, negating the interest costs and payments that accrue over the 200 years or so, he estimates that it would cost around £300 trillion to complete. But he estimates a 1 quadrillion income, making a net economic benefit for Venus of £700 trillion for terraforming Venus. Obviously, these are 1991 figures, and as you might have noticed, prices have gone up a bit since then. So, adjusted for inflation, the cost would be £891 trillion. The income, 2 quadrillion 970 trillion, with a positive balance of about 2 quadrillion 79 trillion pounds in today's money. For context, Greg Laughlin, a professor at Yale, estimated that the Earth is around £4 quadrillion. So to be fair, the approximate cost and income estimates are in the right ballpark. Birch estimates the carrying capacity of Venus is likely to be around 10 billion, which, when you look at the size of Earth, a similar sized globe, is very believable, if not a little conservative. Obviously, when this paper was written, there was no talk of generative AI or the advances in robotics that we've seen in recent times, and it is definitely conceivable that the use of intelligent, self-replicating autonomous machines could greatly accelerate terraforming efforts such as this. Innovative iterations of a plan like this by an AGI would no doubt improve its potential and would certainly make the process far cheaper too. The rate of technological progress currently being made by humanity certainly makes outlandish ideas like terraforming the tumultuous hellscape that is Venus seem ever more possible. And a 200-year time horizon certainly makes it a tantalising prospect. But can it be done? Probably. Should it be done? Eventually, when our level of technology and the cost of the project and our need to expand converges. Yeah. Will it be done? Well, that depends on whether humanity survives the next 50 years or so. We have a few challenges we need to get to grips with first, but I'm staying optimistic. I reckon there's at least a chance. Well, if you've watched the video this far, then you probably like the content, in which case you'll probably like this video too. And if you've got any ideas for topics you'd like to see, hit me up in the comments, I'll see what I can do. Smash the like button, subscribe and all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.